Hello everybody, my name is Yas. I'm a technical trainer working for Microsoft based in Melbourne, Australia. And today we're going to show you how quickly you can spin up a new Azure Kubernetes cluster and deploy your containers into it, which might be used for quite a few different reasons, specifically around microservices architecture. So here I'm in Azure Portal, and the first thing we need to do is obviously creating our cluster. So I'm going to click on create a new resource. And generally speaking, our Kubernetes cluster is very popular at the moment, so you can see that in the popular section. If you didn't see it, you can always search for it here. So if I search for Kubernetes cluster, I can see the Kubernetes services here. I select that option, it brings me to the wizard where you have to fill up some information, some basic information about your cluster. Tell us how you want your cluster set up, and we'll take care of the rest for you. So this is a platform as a service offering, which means it's a fully managed service. So I'm going to click create. And here I have to provide some options. Obviously, the first thing you need to provide is your subscription, your resource group. So I can, for example, select my NDC resource group here. Or if you want to create a new one, that's up to you. Then we have some preset configuration. I'm not going to go deep to this option, but basically this is a preset of a standard, or maybe you want to do a dev test environment or a customized, cost optimized, or maybe you want it for batch processing. So we have some presets you can select from. I'm going to choose a standard. Obviously, you have to give it a name. This name doesn't need to be unique globally, but it needs to be unique within the resource group you're creating it. So for example, I want to call this NDC demo. Because I already have an NDC demo, it's going to give me an error, so I'm going to add 1 to this. So which region you're deploying to this, deploying your service to, that's also very important. I'm going to select one region. And depending on whether your region has availability zones or not, you can select those options. I'm going to clear all these options. And then you have to basically provide some sort of an availability option. Again, we're going to skip all of those options. The most important one here is the auto-scaling option, where your cluster can basically enlarge or scale out or scale in depending on your workload. And the second one is around your networking options. So if I want to come into the networking section, this is where you either get to create a brand new network for your cluster, or if you already have a virtual network, you can integrate that back into your network. I'm going to skip all the other settings because those are not relevant to what you're discussing here. Here, all you need to do is just review your options and create the service. This is going to take us about 10 minutes. So I already have deployed a cluster that we can go and work with. So let me just come back here. I'm going to go and find my resource group, and I'm going to show you this cluster. So we have this NDC demo cluster here. This is already created for us. It's not very specific. I've just gone with the default options, so you get the same experience. The main thing here is that you get to see the API server if you want to directly call the APIs of the Kubernetes cluster, but there is just standard stuff. So we're going to deploy some containers into this AKS cluster. We're going to see how easy it is to do it. What I'm going to use here is I'm not going to use any terminal or anything else. I'm just going to use Cloud Shell. This is a browser-based terminal, so you don't need to install anything. Everything comes pre-installed, and you can just use this. The very first thing I need to do is, obviously, if you are running it on your own container, you're going to have to install the Azure CLI Kubernetes add-on. This is already installed, pre-installed, in fact, within the Cloud Shell. So if I just type here AZAKS, I can just call the get credentials option. So get credentials. I'm going to pass in the name of the resource group that we had, so that's NDC, and then the name of the cluster, obviously, so that's the NDC demo. This is going to authenticate to the AKS cluster. From here on, whatever command we run within this terminal, it's going to be routed through that cluster. So basically, that's going to put it in the authentication context. So now if I can basically type some commands using the kube controller, so kube controller get nodes, for example, this is going to return the current running nodes for our cluster. At the moment, I've got one node ready, so I'm going to deploy something into that node. Now, what are we deploying? We are deploying 2 main applications. One is the front-end application and a backend API. The backend API does nothing really specific, it just keeps the backend data, and it's using Redis cache. The front-end application is also nothing very specific. It's just an application which helps you to vote for dogs or cat, depending on what type of person you are. So I'm going to show you that file because it's very important for you to understand how to write those files. So if I open up my AKS folder here, this is a YAML file. If you're not familiar with YAML, obviously go and investigate on that. This is how you write the specifications. Obviously, there are other ways. You could use Helm charts or stuff like that as well. So here you can see that we have a type of deployment. This deployment is going to deploy a container for us. The container obviously needs to have an address for its image. So if I scroll down, you can see here the node selector, what type of operating system I want to have for my container. This is the image URL, so we're getting it from the Microsoft repository. It's just a Redis cache item. And I'm going to basically have some environment variables, expose the port, and that's it. That's all you need to provide when you're deploying something in there. We also have another application here, which is our front-end app. Again, very similar setup, very similar structure, just the image which is different. So we're deploying a front-end application which is going to interact with our backend. Now, if I come down here, there's one more important thing here, which is the injecting the environment variable to allow the front-end know what is the address for our backend. Because remember, these are all internal AKS cluster stuff. So you're going to have to introduce those variables, and that's it. That's all there is to it. I'm just going to basically close this one here just a bit. Okay. So now I can just type kube controller, and then run the apply command, pass in the file name, which is our, I'm going to have to come one level in, so cd into AKS, and then the command. So kube controller apply -f, which is our file, and then the name of the file. So that file is basically our Azure YAML. I'm going to click enter or type or just press enter, and that will deploy our services into that cluster. Now it's going to take a while for those containers to come up, but I'm going to show you how would that look like in terms of your cluster. So if I come and basically get rid of this essential folder here, bring up the menu, I'm going to come to my workloads and have a look at what's going on here. So this is where you can see your workload. Obviously, there are some workloads which are running by default for the cluster itself. But you can see here we have our backend and the front-end app already. So the backend is already operational. The front-end is still coming up. So we're going to have to look at that. And if I keep scrolling here, you should see that because we had different type of services for our backend and front-end, our backend app is basically a private app versus our front-end app is exposed to the internet via a public IP address. You can also use DNS, but that's just a separate story. So this is the IP address which is used for our front-end application. So if I click on that, it's going to bring up my app. It took less than literally a minute to deploy those containers, and they come up. If I enter something here, it's going to capture my input. If I refresh or basically close this and come back, it's going to maintain my information because these are basically stored in that Redis cache item. So this is how quickly you can spin up your resources within an AKS cluster. And that AKS cluster generally is used to deploy multiple containers that can interact with each other easily, depending on your needs for networking or for other types of needs. You can definitely go for this. We also have another service, which means that if you are not familiar with the concepts or configuration of the AKS, you can go with the managed version of AKS, which is called Container Apps. That's it, and I hope you've enjoyed the demo, and we'll see you in another time. Thank you so much.